The mashed potatoes were still steaming when my mother threw the bowl. It happened so fast that I didn't even have time to flinch. One moment, I was staring down at my plate, trying to ignore the tension that had been thickening all evening. The next, something heavy and wet slammed against my cheek. The sound of the ceramic shattering filled the small dining room. For a second, I didn't even feel the pain. I just felt the silence that followed. Everyone froze. My father's fork clattered onto his plate, and my sister, Clara, stopped mid-laugh. The smell of gravy and wine mixed with something metallic, my own blood. A sharp sting spread down my face, and I lifted my hand to find it smeared with red and potatoes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked up at my mother, who was standing at the end of the table, breathing hard, her fingers still trembling. Her eyes were wild. "Don't you dare disrespect your sister in this house," she hissed. Her voice was low, shaking, but full of something that had been sitting inside her for years. All I had done was refuse to pour wine for Clara. That was it. I'd said, "She can pour her own." Simple words. But in this house, those words were an act of war. Clara was watching me with that familiar look, half pity, half satisfaction. She didn't move to help. She never did. She always liked watching things break, as long as it wasn't her doing the breaking. I could hear my father mutter something like, "Margaret, enough," but his voice was thin and useless. He didn't stand up. He never stood up. He just kept his eyes on the table, pretending this wasn't happening again. I pressed a napkin to my cheek. The sting got worse with every heartbeat. My mother's chest was still rising and falling fast, as if she expected me to yell back. But I didn't give her that. I just sat there, breathing slow, feeling the warmth of the blood and potatoes slide down my jaw. In that quiet moment, I realized this wasn't about the wine. It never was. This was everything my mother had been holding against me, every small argument, every look, every time I refused to play her perfect family game. She had been waiting for a reason to let it all out. The room was so still that even the old clock in the hallway sounded loud. Nobody moved. Clara reached for her napkin, pretending to wipe her mouth, but I saw her smirk when she thought I wasn't looking. I set the napkin down and stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the floor, and that sound made my mother flinch more than the crash of the bowl had. For a second, I almost said something sharp, something final, but I didn't. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the hate in her eyes staring right back at me. When the bowl shattered against my face, it wasn't just the glass that broke, it was every illusion I had about my family. Clara was always the favorite. Everyone in town knew it, even if they never said it out loud. My mother made sure the world saw Clara as perfect. From the time we were little, she was the star. She had ribbons, trophies, and that fake sweet smile that fooled everyone. If she wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, it became a problem. When we were kids, my mother would spend hours helping Clara practice for piano recitals while I sat at the kitchen table trying to finish homework alone. If I asked for help, she'd sigh and say, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I heard those words so often they stopped sounding like an insult and started sounding like a rule. Clara learned fast how to play the game. She knew what my mother wanted, obedience mixed with charm. She could lie through her teeth and still get a kiss on the forehead. I remember once she broke Mom's favorite vase and blamed it on me. I tried to tell the truth, but my mother didn't even listen. She looked right at me and said, "You disappoint me, Evelyn." Clara stood behind her, smiling like she'd won a prize. As we grew older, the gap between us widened. In high school, Clara was homecoming queen, the top of her class, and the girl everyone wanted to be around. I kept to myself. I worked after school to save for college, while she threw parties that my parents pretended not to know about. Somehow, everything she did became a story about how proud Mom was. Everything I did was either ignored or criticized. When college came around, I thought I could finally break free. I worked hard on my applications, poured my heart into essays, and dreamed about leaving that house. But one day, a letter I was waiting for never came. Later, I found it in the trash. The envelope was ripped open, and my essay had coffee stains on it. I knew who had done it. Clara didn't even bother denying it. She just said, "You wouldn't fit in there anyway," and walked off. My mother refused to believe me when I told her. She said I was jealous and dramatic. My father, Robert, was there through all of it, sitting in his recliner, sipping his drink like life didn't happen around him. He never raised his voice. He never defended me. When things got bad, he'd just say, "Let's not start another fight," and walk out of the room. He was like a ghost that lived with us, present but never really there. By the time I turned 18, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my clothes, my savings, and a few books, and left before sunrise. No one stopped me. My father watched from the porch, but he didn't say a word. Clara was still asleep, and my mother didn't even know I was gone until hours later. That was the day I promised myself I would never go back. For years, I kept that promise. But some promises break when family calls. It had been almost 8 years since I'd last stepped inside that house. When the invitation came, I stared at the card for a long time. My mother's neat handwriting filled the envelope, every letter too perfect, too controlled. Family dinner to celebrate Clara's engagement. It sounded harmless, but nothing in that house ever was. I almost threw it away. A week later, my father called. His voice was softer than I remembered, tired and careful. "It would mean a lot if you came, Evie," he said. I could hear the clinking of ice in his glass. "Your mother's been trying." I didn't believe that. Still, a small part of me felt guilty. He was getting older, slower, and lonelier. I told myself I'd go for him, not for her. The drive back to my hometown felt strange. The roads looked the same, long stretches of pine trees and quiet houses that hadn't changed in years. When I turned onto Maple Drive, my chest tightened. The house looked smaller than I remembered, like time had pressed it down. The same cracked mailbox leaned to the left. The porch light was still that dull yellow glow that made everything look older. When I knocked, my mother opened the door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Evelyn," she said like she was greeting a stranger. "You look different." "8 years will do that," I said. She ignored it, stepping aside to let me in. The smell hit me first, lemon cleaner, perfume, and something burning in the oven. The living room hadn't changed. The same floral wallpaper, same family photos in gold frames. There was Clara in her graduation gown, Clara in her office, Clara holding some award. Not a single picture of me after I left. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, glowing in her usual way. Her hair was styled perfectly, her smile polished. "Evie," she said like we were best friends. "You came. I told Mom you would." I forced a small smile. "Congratulations," I said. "Thank you. You'll love Julian. He's wonderful." The name made my stomach twist. I knew a Julian once, years ago. But it couldn't be the same person. Clara never mentioned a last name, and I didn't ask. We sat around the table later, the same oak table I grew up staring at while pretending everything was fine. My father poured wine for everyone, and my mother kept glancing at me like I might break the silence at any second. The air felt too thick, the smiles too wide. Every time someone laughed, it sounded forced, like we were all part of a play we didn't want to be in. My mother asked about my job, her tone sweet but sharp underneath. Clara interrupted with stories about her fiancé's success. My father kept his head down, his fork scraping softly against his plate. Nothing had changed. The wallpaper, the dinner, the way they looked at me, it all felt trapped in time. I could feel something building under the surface, quiet but dangerous. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could sense it, like the air before a storm. Dinner started with polite small talk that felt like walking barefoot over glass. My mother kept asking about Clara's engagement, her voice filled with that false pride she always saved for her favorite child. Clara didn't waste a second before launching into every detail. "Julian's handling a big case right now," she said, twirling her wine glass between her fingers. "He's brilliant. Everyone at his firm adores him." The name hit me like a cold wave. Julian. I hadn't heard it in years, but I could still remember his voice, the way he used to walk me across campus, the way he disappeared one night without an explanation. I'd spent weeks trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Now, sitting at that table, it all made sense. Clara's perfect fiancé was the same man I once loved. I didn't let it show. I smiled politely, nodding while Clara kept talking. She was glowing, feeding off the attention, watching my face for a reaction. My mother was beaming, proud as ever. My father kept quiet, his eyes on his plate like always. When Clara finally paused to take a sip, my mother leaned toward me. "Evelyn, be a dear and pour your sister some wine." Her tone wasn't a request, it was a command, the same one I'd heard my entire life. I looked at the bottle in the center of the table. My hand almost moved out of habit, but then I stopped. I met my mother's eyes and said, calm and steady, "She can pour her own." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother blinked, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. "Excuse me," she said softly, but her voice trembled with warning. I didn't repeat myself. I just sat there, still, quiet, refusing to play the part she'd written for me. Clara's smile twitched. My father's fork froze midair. Something inside my mother shifted then. Her face tightened, her jaw clenched, and I saw her fingers grip the edge of the bowl. She didn't shout first, she didn't even breathe. She just moved, fast and furious. The bowl flew across the table, hitting me square in the face. The sound of it breaking was louder than I remembered from the first time. Warm food splattered against my cheek, the sting sharper than before. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. My father whispered, "Margaret," but it came out weak, barely a sound. My mother stood there, eyes burning, chest heaving like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Don't you ever disrespect this family again," she hissed. I didn't say a word. My cheek burned, and the smell of potatoes and gravy filled the air. I reached for a napkin, wiping my face slowly, every motion deliberate. Clara's smirk returned, small and cruel, like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. No one else said a thing. The dinner was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any scream could have. The cut on my cheek wasn't deep, but it wouldn't stop bleeding. A thin line of red ran down to my jaw, mixing with the mess from the bowl. I could feel everyone staring, waiting to see what I'd do. My hand shook a little as I pressed a napkin against it. The sting didn't matter. What hurt more was how quiet the room was, how no one came to help me. My father finally spoke, his voice small and tired. "Let it go, Evie," he whispered, almost pleading. "It's not worth it." I turned my head toward him, still holding the napkin to my face. He looked at me like he wanted to fix it but didn't know how. Like he'd never known how. He'd spent years pretending not to see what happened in this house. And even now, when I was bleeding at the table, he wanted peace more than truth. My mother stood across from me, her breathing still uneven. She wasn't sorry. Her eyes were sharp, cold, full of something I didn't recognize anymore. "You've always tried to ruin this family," she said. Each word came out like a slap. "You think you're better than us, don't you? You've always been ungrateful." The old me might have argued. I might have cried or begged her to understand. But standing there, with the blood drying on my face and the smell of dinner gone sour, something inside me stopped caring. I looked around the table, Clara pretending to hide her smile behind her glass, my father staring down, my mother still fuming, and I realized I didn't belong there. I never had. I pushed my chair back slowly. The sound of it scraping against the floor made everyone flinch. My mother opened her mouth like she wanted to say more, but I didn't give her the chance. I set the napkin down beside my plate, straightened up, and walked away. No one followed me. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, past the old photos of birthdays and Christmas mornings that had never felt as happy as they looked. The front door was cold against my hand when I pulled it open. The night air hit my face, clean and sharp, washing away the smell of that house. Outside, the crickets were loud, almost too loud after the silence inside. I stood on the porch for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My reflection in the window showed the cut on my face, a small reminder of what I'd just left behind. For a second, I thought I might cry. But no tears came. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting a losing battle. I knew then that something had changed. They had spent years teaching me to be quiet, to take the blame, to believe I was the problem. But standing there under the dim porch light, I finally understood that I wasn't. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. That night, I didn't just leave the house. I left the version of myself they had built. It had been 3 weeks since that dinner, and I hadn't heard a single word from my mother or Clara. I thought they'd pretend I didn't exist again, like they always did when things got uncomfortable. But then my phone rang one afternoon, and I saw my father's name on the screen. His voice sounded tired, even weaker than I remembered. "Evie," he said softly, "your mother's been worried sick." I almost laughed. Worried? About what? That I stained her floor with my blood? He sighed. "You know how she gets." She didn't mean it. Things just got out of hand. It was the same old story, the same excuses he'd used my whole life. I listened, silent, until he said, "Clara's wedding is in 6 months. It would mean a lot if you came. We're trying to make peace before then." That caught my attention, but not for the reason he hoped. I didn't want peace. I wanted answers. I wanted the truth that had always been hidden behind their fake smiles. After we hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about Julian. The name had been stuck in my head since that night. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached out to an old college friend, someone who still lived in the city where Julian worked. She told me something that made my stomach twist. "He still has a picture of you," she said. "It's in a frame on his shelf. I saw it when I dropped by his office." For a while, I just sat there, staring at the wall. A picture of me. After all these years, after he'd chosen Clara, he still kept it. That wasn't love, it was guilt. It meant there was a story I didn't know, and I needed to find it. I didn't want him back. Whatever we'd had was long gone. But I couldn't stand the thought of Clara getting away with one more lie, especially if she had used me to build her perfect little life. I started piecing things together, remembering the timing of when Julian had stopped calling me, how suddenly he'd vanished, and how quickly Clara had shown up with him after I left home. The puzzle started to make sense, and none of it looked good. Clara had always wanted what I had, even when it wasn't hers to take. I'd seen it since we were kids. Now I knew she hadn't changed. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, writing down everything I remembered, dates, messages, things Clara had said. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the truth. For years, they had told me I was the problem. They painted me as jealous, bitter, unstable. But I wasn't any of those things. I had been quiet for too long, and silence had only made their lies stronger. So I made a decision. I was going to find proof, and when I did, I would make sure everyone saw Clara for who she really was. I didn't sleep much the night before I called Julian. My mind kept circling the same questions. Why had he believed Clara? What had she told him? And how deep did her lies go? When I finally picked up the phone, my hand trembled. I kept my voice steady and polite, pretending this was just a friendly chat. "Julian, it's Evelyn," I said. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Then his voice came, cautious but familiar. "Evelyn. Wow. It's been a long time." "I know," I said. "I'm not calling to cause trouble. I just thought we should clear the air before your wedding." He hesitated, then agreed to meet the next afternoon. We met at a small cafe near his office, one I remembered from years ago. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting by the window. He looked almost the same, maybe a little older, a little more careful with his words. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. For a few minutes, we talked like strangers, weather, work, the usual things people say when they don't know where to start. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Julian, I need to ask you something. Back in college, when you stopped talking to me, did Clara have anything to do with it?" He looked away, tapping his fingers against his coffee cup. "She told me you'd cheated," he said quietly. "That you were seeing someone else. She showed me messages. It was stupid of me, but I believed her. You didn't even try to deny it back then." I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. "I didn't deny it because I didn't know what she'd said," I replied. "She made sure of that." I reached into my bag and pulled out my old phone, one I had kept all these years. I'd gone through it the night before, digging through backups and screenshots I hadn't looked at in ages. I turned the screen toward him. "These are the real messages," I said. "The ones between us. The ones she replaced with her own. Look at the timestamps." He leaned forward, scrolling slowly, his face tightening with every line he read. Then he looked at me, his voice low. "She forged them. She changed everything." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He sat back, staring at the table. "I thought I knew her," he said after a long silence. "I thought she was just honest." I took a sip of my coffee. "Clara's good at pretending. She's been doing it her whole life." He ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "Evelyn, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "I didn't come here to ruin your engagement. I just wanted you to know the truth. What you do with it is up to you." He nodded slowly, his mind clearly spinning. I stood to leave, and for a moment he reached like he might stop me, then let his hand fall. As I walked out of the cafe, I didn't feel proud or vindicated. I just felt lighter. For the first time in years, the truth was out there, and I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The week before the wedding felt like watching a storm move closer every day. I hadn't spoken to Julian again after our meeting, but I didn't need to. Word spread on its own. Small-town gossip worked faster than the truth itself. By Monday, people were whispering that Clara's perfect engagement wasn't so perfect after all. I tried to stay out of it. I went to work, came home, and avoided every call from home. But by Wednesday, I knew something big had happened. My father left a short voicemail saying, "Things are tense here. Maybe it's best you don't come to the wedding." That told me everything I needed to know. That evening, I got a message from an old neighbor. "Did you hear? Julian cancelled the rehearsal dinner." I didn't reply. I sat on my couch, phone in my hand, thinking about the cafe meeting, the look on Julian's face when he realized who Clara really was. I hadn't asked him to do anything. But he must have realized he couldn't marry a lie. By Thursday, the panic began. Clara called 3 times, each one more frantic than the last. I didn't answer. Then my phone rang again, and this time it was my mother. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Evelyn," she snapped as soon as I picked up, "what did you do?" Her voice was sharp, trembling, full of rage and fear. "Clara's wedding is falling apart. Julian's family is asking questions, and she's devastated. Are you proud of yourself?" I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence with her accusations. "You've always been jealous," she went on. "Always trying to hurt this family. You can't stand to see your sister happy." When she finally stopped to breathe, I spoke softly. "I didn't do anything, Mom. I just told the truth." She scoffed. "You've always twisted things to make yourself the victim." I almost laughed. "No, Mom. You taught me to hide things, to stay quiet, to make everyone else look good no matter what they did. I'm just not doing that anymore." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't speak. For once, she didn't have a defense ready. "Maybe if you'd listened years ago," I said quietly, "you'd know who Clara really is." That broke her silence. She shouted something I couldn't make out and hung up. The line went dead, but I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to relief. The next day, another call came, this time from my father. He didn't say much. "Julian's not coming," he said quietly. "The wedding's off." His voice cracked a little before he added, "Your mother's beside herself." I thanked him for letting me know. After I hung up, I looked out the window at the grey evening sky. It felt strange, knowing everything was finally unraveling. I hadn't planned any of it. I hadn't wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth out in the open. And now that it was, the silence felt cleaner than it ever had before. The morning of the wedding came grey and quiet. I wasn't invited, but in a town like ours, word of every detail traveled fast. By noon, the ceremony was supposed to start, and the church parking lot was full. I knew because my phone kept buzzing with messages from people who thought I'd want to know. "He didn't show." That was the first text I read. Then another came, "Clara's crying, your mom's losing it." I sat by my window, coffee in hand, watching the rain tap softly against the glass. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just breathed, letting the weight of years lift a little from my chest. At the church, things were falling apart. Later, I'd hear how it happened from my father, who called me that evening. The guests had been seated, the music had started, but Julian never arrived. His side of the family sat in silence while whispers filled the room. Clara tried to keep smiling, pretending it was just a delay, but her hands shook as she fixed her hair over and over. My mother, dressed in pale blue, walked down the aisle twice, whispering with the wedding planner, trying to control the disaster. But after 40 minutes, when Julian still hadn't come, the whispers grew louder. Someone said they'd seen his car leave town that morning. That's when Margaret broke. She did this, she screamed in front of everyone, her voice echoing through the church. Evelyn couldn't stand to see her sister happy. The room went silent. People stared, confused, embarrassed. Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing loud enough for everyone to hear. My father tried to calm Margaret down, but she was past reason. That's when the doors opened. A man in a dark suit walked in, calm and steady. It wasn't Julian, it was his lawyer. He carried a folder and handed it to the pastor before turning to the room. Julian asked me to deliver this, he said. He won't be coming. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as the pastor opened the folder. Inside were printed messages, screenshots, emails, proof of everything Clara had done. The fake texts she'd made years ago to break me and Julian apart. The ones she'd used to manipulate him. And tucked between them were photos showing her affair with one of Julian's colleagues, dates and all. Gasps filled the church. Some people got up and left right then. Others stared at Clara, who looked frozen, her mouth open but no words coming out. My mother's face went white. She tried to speak, but nothing came out except a small, broken sound. My father called later, his voice shaking. Everyone saw it, Evie. The whole truth. Clara's, it's over. He didn't say much after that. He didn't have to. I didn't go near the church. I didn't need to. I put on my jacket and walked outside, the air cool and clean after the rain. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the problem. I walked down the street with my head high, no longer carrying their lies with me. The truth had done the work I never could. Months passed, and life slowly found a new rhythm. I moved into a small apartment near the coast, a quiet place with white walls, a creaky wooden floor, and a view of the ocean from my kitchen window. The first morning there, I stood by that window with a cup of coffee and watched the waves move in steady lines. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. No shouting, no pretending, no one telling me who to be. Just peace. I hadn't spoken to my mother or Clara since the wedding. They didn't try to reach me, and I didn't expect them to. My father called sometimes, short calls at first, just checking in, his voice always soft and careful. Then one day, he said something I never thought I'd hear. I left her, he told me. I couldn't keep living like that. There was a long pause on the line before I answered. I'm proud of you, Dad. He didn't say much after that, but I could tell he meant it when he said, I should have done it sooner. He visited once that fall. We sat on the beach, the wind carrying our words away as fast as we said them. He apologized for all the years he'd stayed quiet, for every time he'd told me to let it go. I didn't need him to explain. Some wounds don't need fixing, just acknowledgement. The days were slow and calm after that. I spent my mornings walking along the shore, collecting shells like I used to as a kid. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since high school. The silence that used to feel empty now felt full of my own voice, my own choices. Sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I could still see the faint line across my cheek, just below my eye. The scar had faded, but it hadn't disappeared completely. I used to hate it. Now, I touched it gently every so often, a reminder of what I'd come through. It wasn't just a mark, it was proof that I'd survived something meant to break me. I didn't think much about Clara anymore. I heard through a friend that she'd moved out of town, that people didn't look at her the same way they used to. My mother stayed alone in that house with the floral wallpaper, still pretending nothing was her fault. Maybe that was her punishment, to live in her own silence. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I didn't owe anyone my peace anymore. I could breathe, sleep, wake up without dread. Sometimes I'd catch the smell of mashed potatoes or hear the clink of a wine glass and feel that old ache, but it passed quickly. One evening, standing on my balcony, watching the sunset turn the sky golden pink, I thought about that night, the bowl, the blood, the silence that followed. And for the first time, I smiled. They threw a bowl at me to silence me. But all it did was wake me up.